The hand on Riven's lower back wasn't rough. That was the problem. Rough meant anger. Anger meant predictable. This touch was deliberate, measured, the kind that came with ownership baked into every fingertip. Riven felt it through the thin fabric of his catering uniform, white cotton, already damp with sweat despite the air conditioning humming through the private dining hall. He didn't pull away. Pulling away meant weakness here. Weakness meant attention. Attention meant becoming the entertainment. "Keep moving," the guard muttered, his breath stale with cigarettes and coffee. The pressure increased, nudging Riven forward through the double doors that opened into a wash of golden light so bright it made his eyes water. Or maybe that was just the heat. 7 months pregnant in a room designed to make you feel small. That was its own kind of cruelty. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The Black Harbor Syndicate didn't do casual dinners. Every plate was crystal. Every glass was imported. Every suit in the room cost more than Riven made in 6 months, and everyone wearing one knew it. The space smelled like expensive cologne layered over cigar smoke, like leather chairs and old money, and something else Riven couldn't name but recognized in his gut. Power. The kind that didn't need to announce itself. He steadied his breathing, one hand instinctively moving to rest over the curve of his stomach. The baby kicked, sharp, insistent, and Riven pressed gently, a silent promise. Not here, not now, just let me get through this. Alphas lined the walls like decorations, arms crossed, eyes tracking his every step. None of them smiled. Smiling wasn't part of the uniform. They were here to watch, to enforce, to remind everyone else what happened when you forgot your place. Riven had never forgotten his place. He just refused to believe it was permanent. Over there, the guard pointed toward the far end of the hall, where a long mahogany table stretched beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than Riven's life. Men sat around it, suits dark, expressions darker. They weren't eating yet. They were waiting. For him. Riven's pulse quickened, but his face stayed calm. Calm was armor. Calm was survival. He'd learned that years ago, back when survival meant something different, back when his hands were wrapped in tape instead of resting protectively over new life. He moved forward, shoes clicking softly against marble floors that reflected the chandelier's light in fractured patterns. Each step felt heavier than the last, gravity pulling at him in ways that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with the weight of too many eyes. A laugh cut through the air. Low, sharp, pleased with itself. Riven didn't look up. Not yet. "Gentlemen," a voice said, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "Our caterer has arrived." The words hung in the air like smoke. Caterer. Not chef. Not professional. Caterer. A word designed to strip dignity, to remind him he was here to serve, not participate. Riven knew the game. He'd played it before. He'd survive it again. But something about the way the voice curled around the word made his stomach tighten. He reached the table, setting down the tray of appetizers with careful precision. Bruschetta with heirloom tomatoes, prosciutto-wrapped figs. Delicate, expensive, forgettable. The kind of food rich men ate while making decisions that destroyed lives. "Thank you," someone muttered, barely glancing at him. Riven nodded, stepping back. That should have been it. He should have been dismissed, sent back to the kitchen, allowed to finish his shift in peace. But the voice that had introduced him wasn't done. "Riven, is it?" Riven's breath caught. Names weren't supposed to matter here. Omegas weren't supposed to be individuals. They were functions, roles, background noise. Hearing his name spoken aloud felt like being grabbed by the throat. He lifted his eyes slowly, carefully, meeting the gaze of the man seated at the head of the table. Cade Moore Rex. Everyone in Black Harbor knew that name, knew what it meant. Cade didn't rise through the ranks by being kind. He rose by being efficient, by making examples out of anyone who thought compassion was strength. His reputation was built on discipline that looked like cruelty and cruelty that looked like order. And right now he was smiling. "Yes, sir," Riven said quietly. Cade leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine that caught the light like blood. His suit was impeccable. Dark navy, tailored perfectly, the kind of craftsmanship that whispered wealth without shouting. His hair was cut short, neat, professional. Everything about him screamed control, except his eyes. His eyes were hungry. "You've been working for us how long now?" Cade asked, tone conversational, almost friendly. 3 months, sir. 3 months. Cade nodded slowly, as if considering this deeply. "And in those 3 months, have you noticed anything unusual about your condition?" The room stilled. Riven's hand tightened over his stomach. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." Cade's smile widened. "I mean your pregnancy, Riven. Surely you've noticed it's made things more difficult. Slower, less efficient." There it was. The trap. Riven could feel it closing around him, could see the other men at the table watching with barely concealed interest. This wasn't about his performance. This was about entertainment. This was about reminding everyone what happened when you existed in a space that wasn't designed for you. "I manage, sir," Riven said carefully. "You manage." Cade repeated the words slowly, tasting them. "That's admirable, really. But I can't help wondering." He paused, taking a slow sip of wine. "If managing is enough." Riven said nothing. Silence was safer than words. Cade set his glass down with a soft clink that echoed through the hall. "You know what I hate, gentlemen?" No one answered. They didn't need to. This wasn't a question. "I hate when people pretend to be stronger than they are." Cade's gaze never left Riven's face. "When they take on responsibilities they can't handle. When they put pride over practicality." The air shifted. Riven felt it in his chest, in the way his lungs suddenly couldn't pull in enough oxygen, in the way the baby inside him seemed to sense the danger and went still. "Tell me, Riven," Cade continued, leaning forward slightly, "have you ever seen an Omega fight?" The question landed like a physical blow. A few nervous laughs scattered through the room. Not agreement, just fear dressed up as amusement. Cade's smile turned sharp. "I'm serious. Ever seen one? I haven't. I've always wondered if it's even possible. If an Omega has the capacity for real aggression, real strength." Riven's pulse thundered in his ears. "I wouldn't know, sir. You wouldn't know." Cade stood slowly, pushing his chair back with a scrape that made Riven flinch. "Well, maybe it's time we found out." He moved around the table with the ease of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. "How about a demonstration?" Cade said, voice light, almost playful. "Nothing serious, just a little sparring. You and me, right here." The room held its breath. Riven's mind raced. This wasn't a request. This wasn't even a test. This was a public humiliation designed to reinforce the hierarchy, to remind everyone watching that Omegas were fragile, that pregnancy made you a liability, that strength belonged only to alphas, and refusing would only make it worse. "I'm pregnant," Riven said quietly, keeping his voice steady. "That wouldn't be fair." Cade laughed. A sound that was all teeth and no warmth. "Exactly." The word hung in the air like a noose. And Riven realized, with cold clarity, that fairness had never been part of the equation. Cade stepped closer, close enough that Riven could smell his cologne. Something expensive and suffocating. "Unless you're scared?" The challenge was clear. The room waited, and Riven felt something old and dangerous stir in his chest. Something he'd buried years ago. Something that knew how to survive when survival looked like violence. He raised his eyes slowly, meeting Cade's gaze without flinching. "If I agree," Riven said, voice low but steady, "we do it controlled. No audience. No spectacle." For the first time, Cade's smile faltered. Not much. Just a flicker. But enough. Enough to let Riven know that confidence, no matter how loud, always had cracks. "You don't get to set terms," Cade said. But his voice had lost some of its certainty. Riven didn't respond. He just waited. And in that silence, something shifted. One of the guards coughed. Another shifted his weight. The men at the table exchanged glances. Cade's jaw tightened. "Fine. Private room. 5 minutes." He turned away, snapping his fingers at 2 guards. Clear the east side office. Now. The guards moved immediately, vanishing through a side door. Cade looked back at Riven, eyes cold. Don't make me wait. Then he was gone, disappearing into the hallway with the kind of exit that demanded obedience. The room exhaled collectively. Riven stood alone in the golden light, one hand still pressed to his stomach, feeling the baby kick again. Stronger this time, as if sensing the storm about to break. What no one in that room knew, what Riven had spent years making sure no one would ever know, was that before Black Harbor, before pregnancy, before he learned that silence could be survival, he had been someone else entirely. Someone who understood violence not as a threat, but as a language. Someone who had walked away from that language because it threatened to consume him whole. And now, surrounded by men who believed power was loud and dominance was strength, Riven faced a choice he'd hoped never to make again. The guard reappeared in the doorway, gesturing sharply. Move! Riven took a breath. Then he walked toward the private room, each step carrying him closer to a confrontation that would either break him or remind him exactly who he used to be. What do you think happens when Riven enters that room? Drop your predictions below. The hallway was narrower than the dining hall. Riven noticed that immediately. Noticed the way the walls seemed to press in. Noticed the way the overhead lights flickered just slightly, casting shadows that moved when they shouldn't. His footsteps echoed too loud against the tile, each one a countdown he couldn't stop. The guard ahead of him didn't speak, didn't look back. Just walked with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd escorted too many people to too many private rooms and learned not to care what happened inside them. Riven's hand stayed over his stomach. The baby had gone still again. That worried him more than the kicking. Stillness meant awareness, meant something primal inside that tiny growing body understood danger better than reason could explain. I'm sorry, Riven thought. I'm so sorry. But apologies didn't change reality. They stopped in front of a heavy oak door, the kind that swallowed sound. The guard pulled it open without ceremony, gesturing for Riven to enter first. Riven hesitated, just for a second, long enough for the guard's expression to shift from neutral to something resembling pity. Don't take too long, the guard muttered. Makes it worse. Then he stepped aside. Riven walked through the door. The room inside was smaller than he expected. No windows. A single desk pushed against the far wall, papers stacked neatly, a lamp casting warm light across dark wood, 2 leather chairs, a bookshelf filled with titles Riven didn't recognize. Everything about the space screamed order, control, the kind of environment designed to make you feel small without needing to say a word. Cade stood in the center of the room, jacket removed, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked relaxed. That was the worst part. Close the door, Cade said without looking up. Riven obeyed, the soft click of the latch settling into place like a prison lock. Cade finally turned, his gaze sweeping over Riven with the kind of assessment that felt clinical. Not sexual, not even cruel, just measuring. You understand why we're here, Cade said. It wasn't a question. Riven didn't answer. This isn't personal, Cade continued, moving slowly around the room's perimeter like a professor delivering a lecture. It's about order. Structure. The syndicate works because everyone understands their role. Alphas lead, betas support, omegas adapt. The word adapt landed heavy. And when someone steps outside that structure, Cade said, stopping directly in front of Riven, it creates confusion, weakness. People start thinking they can rewrite the rules. I'm not rewriting anything, Riven said quietly. Aren't you? Cade's smile was thin. You took a job you can barely perform. You insisted on working through a pregnancy that makes you a liability. You refused to take leave when it was offered. That's not adaptation, Riven. That's defiance. That's survival. The words came out before Riven could stop them. Cade's eyes narrowed. Survival is knowing when to step back. Survival is accepting help. Survival is not putting yourself and everyone around you at risk because of pride. Is that what this is about? Riven asked, voice still calm but edged with something harder. Risk? Or is it about making sure I remember my place? The room went cold. Cade's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. A subtle tightening. A readiness that hadn't been there before. "Your place," Cade said slowly, "is wherever I say it is." He moved closer, close enough that Riven could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his skin. "You think you're special?" Cade continued, voice dropping. "You think pregnancy makes you untouchable? Protected? It doesn't. It makes you fragile. And fragile things break." Riven didn't step back. Couldn't. If he stepped back, Cade would see fear. Fear would become permission. "I'm not asking to be special," Riven said quietly. "I'm asking to do my job." "Your job," Cade repeated, almost amused. "Your job is to serve food and stay invisible. That's it." "But you couldn't even manage that, could you? You had to draw attention. Had to make people wonder why we're accommodating you. Had to become a distraction." "I never asked for accommodation. You exist in this space. That's accommodation enough." The words hit like a slap. Not because they were cruel, Riven had heard crueler, but because they were honest. Because they reflected a belief system so deeply embedded that Cade didn't even recognize it as cruelty. He thought he was being reasonable. Thought he was maintaining order. Thought he was helping. That was what made men like Cade dangerous. Not the violence, the certainty. "So," Cade said, stepping back and rolling his shoulders like an athlete preparing for a match, "let's settle this. You prove you can handle yourself, and maybe I'll reconsider my assessment. But if you can't..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Riven's pulse quickened, adrenaline beginning to flood his system in ways he trained himself to suppress. His body remembered things his mind had tried to forget. The way to stand, the way to breathe, the way to calculate distance and momentum and leverage. But his body also carried 7 months of new weight, new vulnerability, new stakes that had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with protecting something infinitely more important than himself. "I'm not going to hurt you," Riven said quietly. Cade laughed. Sharp, genuine. "That's sweet. Really. But you don't get to decide that." He moved. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just a step forward, testing, watching how Riven reacted. Riven didn't flinch. Cade's smile faded slightly. "You know what I think? I think you're too scared to even try. I think you'll just stand there and take it because that's what Omegas do. They endure. They survive. But they never fight back." He moved again, closer, hands loose at his sides but ready. "Prove me wrong," Cade said softly. "Go ahead. Throw a punch. Show me that fire everyone pretends Omegas don't have." Riven's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to stay still, to endure, to outlast this moment and move on. But another part of him, older, harder, forged in places that didn't reward endurance, whispered something different. Show him nothing. Let him believe he's right. And when he overcommits... Cade's hand shot out, not quite a hit but a push, catching Riven's shoulder and forcing him back a step. Riven stumbled slightly, catching himself against the desk. "See," Cade said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "Fragile." He moved forward again, confidence building with every second Riven didn't retaliate. "This is pathetic," Cade continued. "I thought maybe you'd surprise me, but you're just like every other Omega I've met. All talk, no spine." Riven's breathing steadied. His hand slipped from his stomach, hanging loose at his side. Cade noticed. "Finally giving up?" he asked, smirking. "Smart choice." He reached out again, this time aiming for Riven's chest. Another push, another demonstration of dominance. But this time, Riven moved. Not much, just a slight shift in weight. A turn of his shoulder that redirected Cade's hand past him instead of into him. Cade's momentum carried him forward, off balance for just a fraction of a second. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't even resistance. It was just adjustment. Cade recovered quickly, spinning to face Riven with something new in his eyes. Not anger, confusion. "What was that?" he asked slowly. Riven said nothing. Cade's expression hardened. "I said, what was that?" "I moved," Riven said simply. "You?" Cade cut himself off, jaw working. You think you're clever? I think I'm trying to avoid getting hurt. Then stand still and take it. That's not avoiding. That's enduring. The distinction seemed to enrage Cade more than outright defiance would have. He moved faster this time, hands coming up in a more deliberate strike. Riven shifted again, minimal movement, maximum efficiency, redirecting force instead of absorbing it. Cade stumbled, catching himself against the desk. The room went silent. For 3 long seconds, neither of them moved. Then Cade straightened slowly, his face unreadable. You're trained, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Riven didn't confirm or deny. Cade's eyes narrowed. How trained? Still, Riven said nothing. And in that silence, Cade's confidence began to crack. Not much, just enough. Enough for doubt to creep in. Enough for him to realize that the Omega standing in front of him, pregnant, vulnerable, supposedly fragile, wasn't behaving the way Omegas were supposed to behave. Cade took a step back, reassessing. This isn't over, he said, voice tight. Riven met his gaze steadily. I never said it was. The guard knocked once. A sharp, impatient sound. Time's up, came the muffled voice from the other side of the door. Cade didn't move immediately, just stood there, staring at Riven like he was a puzzle that refused to make sense. Finally, he grabbed his jacket from the chair, shrugging it on with sharp, angry movements. We're not done, he said again, moving toward the door. Riven remained silent. Cade paused with his hand on the doorknob, looking back one last time. You should be more careful, he said quietly. Secrets have a way of coming out in places like this. And when they do, he didn't finish, just opened the door and walked out, leaving Riven alone in the small office with nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat and the faint, insistent kick of the baby inside him. Riven pressed his hand back over his stomach, exhaling slowly.
Not yet, he thought. Not yet. But he could feel it coming. The unraveling. The moment when silence would no longer be enough. Do you think Cade will let this go? Or is Riven's secret about to become everyone's problem? Let us know your thoughts. Riven didn't return to the kitchen immediately. He stood in the hallway outside the office, back pressed against the cool wall, forcing his breathing to even out. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline finally releasing its grip on his system. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if protesting the surge of stress hormones flooding through them both. I know, Riven whispered, placing both hands over his stomach. I know. Footsteps approached from the main hall, quick, purposeful, multiple sets. Riven pushed off the wall, straightening his uniform and smoothing down the fabric that had wrinkled during the confrontation. By the time the guards rounded the corner, he looked composed. Tired, maybe, but composed. They didn't speak to him, just walked past like he wasn't there, like he'd already been dismissed from memory. That was fine. Being forgotten was safer than being remembered. Riven made his way back toward the kitchen, each step measured, deliberate. The dining hall had emptied, guests moving to a secondary lounge for drinks and cigars, the next phase of whatever business they were conducting. He caught fragments of conversation as he passed, words like expansion and territory and compliance drifting through open doorways. The kitchen was chaos when he entered. 2 other staff members, both betas, moved frantically between stations, plating desserts and arranging drink trays. They barely glanced at Riven when he walked in, too focused on their tasks to care where he'd been or why he'd been gone so long. Grab the coffee service, one of them said without looking up. Table 6. Riven moved to comply, grateful for the routine. Routine meant invisibility. Invisibility meant safety. He was halfway through preparing the coffee when the kitchen door swung open again. Not a guard this time. Cade. The other staff members froze, eyes going wide. Alphas didn't come to the kitchen. Alphas didn't concern themselves with logistics or service or anything that happened behind the scenes. Their presence here was wrong, off-script, the kind of deviation that made everyone nervous. Cade's gaze swept the room once before landing on Riven. A word, he said, not a request. The other staff members suddenly became very interested in their work. Heads down, movements careful. Riven set down the coffee pot and followed Cade back into the hallway. This time, they didn't go to a private room. Cade stopped just outside the kitchen door, close enough to the main hall that anyone could see them, but far enough that conversation wouldn't carry. "I made some calls," Cade said without preamble. Riven's stomach dropped. "Called a few contacts. Asked around." Cade's expression was unreadable. "Turns out you're not from Black Harbor originally. You came here 3 years ago. Before that..." He paused. "Nevada." Riven kept his face blank. "Nevada has underground circuits," Cade continued slowly, watching Riven's reaction. "Boxing, MMA, bare knuckle, the kind of places people go when they want to disappear into violence." "I was a lot of things before I came here," Riven said carefully. "Most people are. Most people don't move like you moved in that office. I moved like someone trying not to get hit." "No." Cade stepped closer, voice dropping. "You moved like someone who's been hit before and learned how to make it stop." The observation was too accurate. Riven said nothing. Cade studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Not quite respect, not quite fear, something in between. "You should have told me," Cade said finally. "Told you what? That you weren't just some Omega playing caterer. That you had a history." "My history doesn't change my job," Riven said quietly. "I'm here to work, not to fight." "And yet," Cade's smile was cold. "Here we are." A door opened down the hall, voices spilling out, laughter loud and alcohol loose. Cade glanced toward the sound, then back at Riven. "The others don't know. About Nevada. About whatever you were before. I'd like to keep it that way. I'm sure you would." Cade's tone was thoughtful now, calculating. "But information has value, especially information about someone who's been lying about who they are." Riven's pulse quickened. "I never lied. Omission is just polite lying." "Then we're all liars here." Cade's expression hardened. "Don't compare yourself to me." "I wasn't." The response seemed to throw Cade off balance. He opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed once. Short and humorless. "You're interesting," he said finally. "I'll give you that. I'd rather be boring." Too late. Another group emerged from the lounge, suits dark, expressions sharp. One of them called out to Cade, waving him over. Cade raised a hand in acknowledgement, then looked back at Riven. "This conversation isn't over. But for now." He straightened his jacket. "Finish your shift. Go home. And think carefully about how you want this to play out." He started to walk away, then paused. "Oh, and Riven?" Riven waited. "If you really were a fighter," Cade said quietly, "you should know that fights don't end just because you walk away from them. They follow you, and eventually, they find you." Then he was gone, disappearing into the cluster of waiting alphas. Riven stood alone in the hallway, heart pounding, hands shaking harder now than they had in the office. Because Cade was right. Fights did follow you. And Riven had been running from his for 3 years. The apartment was small when Riven finally made it home. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, a bathroom with a shower that only worked if you angled the faucet just right. But it was his, paid for by his own work. No strings, no debts. Riven locked the door behind him, sliding the deadbolt and chain into place with the kind of ritual precision that came from learned paranoia. Then he let himself collapse onto the worn couch, head falling back against the cushions. The baby kicked again, persistent, demanding. "I know," Riven murmured, placing a hand over the movement. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let it get that far." But what choice had he had? Refusing Cade outright would have marked him as insubordinate. Fighting back too hard would have confirmed whatever suspicions were already forming. Playing weak would have invited worse. There was no good option. There never was in places built on hierarchy. Riven's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Enjoy the rest of your evening. We'll talk soon. K." Riven deleted it immediately, then sat in the silence of his apartment, listening to the distant sounds of the city beyond his walls. Sirens, traffic, voices raised in argument or laughter. The mechanical hum of life continuing whether you participated or not. He thought about Nevada, about canvas and blood and the taste of adrenaline so sharp it felt like breathing glass. About the choice he'd made to leave all of that behind, to build something quieter, something safer. About how easily safety could be stripped away by men who saw vulnerability as invitation. His hand stayed over his stomach, feeling the steady rhythm of movement beneath his palm. "I won't let him hurt you," Riven whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Promises like that only worked if you had power to back them up. And right now, Riven's power was a secret he'd buried so deep, he'd almost convinced himself it didn't exist anymore. Almost. The baby kicked again, and Riven closed his eyes, trying to remember what it felt like to be someone who didn't have to choose between silence and survival. But the memory wouldn't come. All he could feel was the weight of what was coming. How far will Cade push before Riven stops running from his past? Drop your thoughts below. The call came at 6 a.m. Riven was already awake. Had been for an hour, staring at the ceiling while the baby performed what felt like acrobatics against his ribcage. Sleep had become theoretical lately, something other people did while he lay awake calculating how many more months until maternity leave became unavoidable. His phone vibrated against the nightstand, the screen lighting up with another unknown number. He let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello? Kitchen. 1 hour. Don't be late." Click. Not Cade's voice. One of the guards. Maybe the one from yesterday, maybe someone else. They all sounded the same. Flat, efficient, stripped of anything resembling personality. Riven sat up slowly, the movement taking more effort than it should have. His back ached. His feet were still swollen from yesterday's shift. Every part of him screamed to stay in bed, to call in sick, to pretend yesterday hadn't happened. But pretending didn't pay rent. He showered, dressed, made it to the syndicate's main building with 10 minutes to spare. The kitchen was empty when he arrived, unusual for this time of morning. Normally there were at least 2 other staff members prepping for the day, arguing over whose turn it was to inventory the walk-in freezer. Today, nothing. Just silence and the hum of industrial refrigerators. Riven stood in the doorway, unease prickling along his spine. Closed the door. Cade's voice came from somewhere behind the main prep station. Riven stepped inside, letting the door swing shut behind him. Cade emerged from the storage area, dressed more casually than yesterday. Dark jeans, a black shirt, no jacket. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, jaw tight with something that might have been stress or anger or both. "Sit," Cade said, gesturing to one of the stools near the counter. Riven didn't move. "I have prep work. Sit." This time it wasn't a suggestion. Riven sat, keeping his hands folded over his stomach in what he hoped looked like calm rather than protective. Cade leaned against the counter opposite him, arms crossed, studying Riven with the kind of intensity that felt invasive. "I didn't sleep last night," Cade said finally. "Kept thinking about our conversation." Riven waited, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Cade's voice was measured, controlled. "You're a problem. I'm a caterer. You're a variable." Cade pushed off the counter, pacing slowly. "This organization works because everyone fits into a predictable pattern. Alphas lead, betas execute, omegas adapt. But you," he stopped, looking directly at Riven. "You don't fit. I do my job. You do your job while hiding who you are. That's different." "Everyone hides who they are," Riven said quietly. "That's how places like this function." Cade's expression flickered. Something almost like agreement quickly buried. "Maybe," he admitted, "but most people's secrets don't involve the kind of skills that could be dangerous." "I'm not dangerous. You were trained to hurt people. I was trained to defend myself." Same thing, depending on context. Riven's jaw tightened. "If you're going to fire me, just do it." I'm not firing you. Cade resumed pacing. I'm trying to figure out what to do with you. There's nothing to figure out. I work. I go home. I don't cause problems. You caused one yesterday. You challenged me. And you responded in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about you. Cade stopped pacing, turning to face Riven fully. That's a problem. The kitchen door swung open. A different guard entered, older, scarred, the kind of man who'd seen enough violence to recognize it in others. "Boss," he said, nodding to Cade. Then his gaze shifted to Riven, lingering for a moment longer than comfortable before looking away. "We're busy," Cade said sharply. The guard didn't leave. "Moretti wants to see you. Now." Cade's expression hardened. "Tell him I'm in a meeting." He said now. A beat of silence. Then Cade exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Fine. Give me 5 minutes." The guard nodded and left. Cade turned back to Riven, something shifting in his demeanor. Less aggressive. More uncertain. "Moretti is my superior," Cade said quietly. "He's the one who decides what happens to people who become problems." Riven's stomach dropped. "I didn't tell him about yesterday," Cade continued, "about what happened in the office. But if he finds out on his own." He trailed off, the implication clear. "What do you want from me?" Riven asked, voice steady despite the fear crawling up his throat. "I want to understand why an Omega with your particular set of skills would choose to work in a place like this. Why you'd hide what you can do. Why you'd put yourself in a position where you're vulnerable instead of using that training to be something more. Because being something more," Riven said slowly, "got people killed." The words hung in the air between them. Cade's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Riven shook his head. "No, that wasn't a request. I don't care." For a moment, Cade looked genuinely surprised. Then something else flickered across his face. Not anger, but something closer to respect. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Cade said finally. "Maybe both." Cade's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, expression darkening. "I have to go, but this conversation isn't over." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing." Riven waited. "There's a private event tonight. Small group. High stakes. I need you to work it." "I'm scheduled off tonight." "Not anymore." Riven's hands tightened over his stomach. "Cade, it's not a request, Riven. It's an order. And if you refuse..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Then he was gone, door swinging shut behind him. Riven sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by stainless steel and silence. His phone buzzed. Another text. Same unknown number as before. "East Wing. Private lounge. 8 p.m. Wear black. K." Riven stared at the message for a long time. Then he stood slowly, moving to the sink and splashing cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the small mirror hanging above the basin. Pale skin, dark circles under his eyes, the curve of his stomach visible even through the loose uniform shirt. He looked exhausted. He looked vulnerable. He looked exactly like what Cade expected. But underneath all of that, buried beneath months of careful performance and practiced silence, was something else. Something that remembered canvas and blood and the sound of a referee calling a fight. Something that knew how to survive when survival stopped being passive. Riven dried his face with a paper towel, straightening his shoulders. If Cade wanted to push, Riven would let him. But only so far. And when the pushing stopped, when Cade finally overcommit the way arrogant men always did, Riven would be ready. What's waiting for Riven in that private lounge tonight? Drop your predictions. The East Wing felt different at night. During the day, it was just another part of the building, administrative offices, meeting rooms, spaces designed for business. But at night, with most of the lights dimmed and only specific rooms illuminated, it became something else. A labyrinth, a stage, a place where bad decisions got made behind closed doors. Riven stood outside the private lounge at exactly 8 p.m., dressed in the black clothing Cade had specified. Not a uniform this time. just black pants and a black shirt that fit loosely enough to accommodate his pregnancy while still looking intentional. Professional. Invisible. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the door, he could hear voices. Not many. Maybe 6 people, maybe fewer. The tone was casual but tense, the kind of conversation that happened when everyone was armed but pretending they weren't. Riven knocked once. The voices stopped immediately. Footsteps approached, heavy, measured. The door opened. Not a guard this time. Cade himself, expression unreadable. "You're on time," he said. Not quite approval, but not criticism either. "Good." He stepped aside, gesturing for Riven to enter. The lounge was smaller than the main dining hall but more intimate. Leather chairs arranged in a loose circle. A bar along one wall, fully stocked. Low lighting that made everyone's features look sharper, more defined. And in those chairs sat 5 men. All alphas, all dressed in the kind of expensive casual clothing that cost more than Riven made in a month. They looked up when Riven entered. One of them smiled. Not friendly, predatory. "Gentlemen," Cade said, closing the door behind Riven. "This is Riven. He'll be handling service tonight." "Service?" One of the men repeated, the word dripping with suggestion. Cade's expression hardened. "Drinks. Food. That's it." The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "Of course. What else would I mean?" Riven moved to the bar, keeping his movements smooth, practiced. He'd done this before, knew how to fade into the background, how to anticipate needs without being asked, how to exist without demanding acknowledgement. But tonight felt different. Tonight, every eye in the room tracked his movements. "So," one of the alphas said, leaning back in his chair, "Cade tells us you're full of surprises." Riven didn't respond, just poured whiskey into crystal glasses with steady hands. "The strong, silent type," another man said, amused. "Cute." Cade's jaw tightened. "Can we focus?" "We are focused," the first man said. "Just getting to know our server. No harm in that." Riven brought the drinks over on a tray, distributing them with mechanical efficiency. He could feel the weight of their attention, could sense the way they evaluated him, not as a person but as an object. Curiosity. A weakness in Cade's armor. "Thank you, sweetheart," one of them said, voice dripping with condescension. Riven said nothing, just returned to the bar and waited. The conversation resumed: business talk, territory disputes, discussions about loyalty and consequences. Riven tuned most of it out, focusing instead on his breathing, on keeping his body language neutral. Then he heard his name. "But Riven here is more than just a caterer, aren't you?" The speaker was the man who'd smiled earlier. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Riven looked up. "I'm here to work." "That's not what I asked." The man leaned forward. "I asked if you were more than a caterer." Cade cut in. "Dominic, drop it." "I'm just curious," Dominic said, not looking away from Riven. "Because Cade's been acting strange lately, protective, and I'm wondering why." "I'm not acting protective," Cade said, voice tight. "You pulled him aside twice yesterday. Had private meetings. Cleared a room." Dominic's smile widened. "That's not normal behavior for staff." The room had gone quiet. All eyes on Riven now. "There's nothing to tell," Riven said calmly. "See, I don't believe that." Dominic stood, moving slowly across the room. "I think there's a very interesting story here, and I think Cade's trying to keep it quiet." "Because there's nothing to keep quiet," Cade said, standing as well. "He's an employee. That's it. An employee you challenged to a fight." The words landed like a bomb. Cade went very still. "Oh, you thought I didn't know?" Dominic laughed. "You cleared a private room. Had guards posted outside. That kind of thing gets noticed, Cade. Especially when the Omega you challenged walks out without a scratch." Riven's pulse quickened. "That's not," Cade started. "Show us," Dominic interrupted, looking at Riven. "Show us what you did. How you handled him." "No," Riven said quietly. "Why not?" scared, tired. Dominic's expression darkened. You know what I think? I think you're hiding something, and I think Cade's helping you hide it, which makes me wonder what you're offering in return. The implication was clear. Disgusting. Cade moved forward, jaw clenched. Watch your mouth. Or what? Dominic challenged. You'll fight me too? Defend his honor like some kind of... He didn't get to finish, because Cade's fist connected with his jaw in a movement so fast Riven almost missed it. Dominic staggered back, catching himself against a chair. The room exploded into motion. Men standing, hands moving toward concealed weapons, tension crackling like electricity. Everyone calm down. One of the other alphas said, voice sharp. Now. Slowly, the room settled. Dominic straightened, wiping blood from his split lip. His eyes burned with rage, but underneath that, fear. You just made a mistake, Dominic said quietly. Cade didn't respond, just stood there, breathing hard, fists still clenched. Dominic's gaze shifted to Riven. This isn't over. Then he walked out, slamming the door behind him. The remaining alphas exchanged glances. Meeting's over, one of them said finally. We'll reconvene when everyone's calmed down. They filed out one by one, leaving Cade and Riven alone in the lounge. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Cade turned, looking at Riven with an expression that might have been regret or might have been something else entirely. I didn't mean for that to happen, he said quietly. Yes, you did, Riven replied. Cade's eyes narrowed. What? You wanted them to see you defend me. You wanted them to know I'm under your protection. Riven stood slowly. The question is why? Cade opened his mouth, closed it, then laughed. Short and bitter. You're right. I did. Why? Because... Cade cut himself off, running a hand through his hair. Because I don't know what else to do with you. The admission hung between them. You're a problem I can't solve, Cade continued. Can't intimidate you. Can't control you. Can't even predict you. And that scares me. I'm not trying to scare you. I know. That's what makes it worse. Cade moved closer, voice dropping. You just exist. And somehow that's more dangerous than anything I've encountered. Riven said nothing. Just watched as Cade struggled with something he couldn't name. Dominic's going to come for you now, Cade said finally. He won't let this go. I know. And when he does, I'll handle it. Cade's eyes searched Riven's face. How? Riven's hand moved to rest over his stomach. Protective. Instinctive. However I have to, he said quietly. And for the first time since they'd met, Cade looked genuinely afraid. Not of Riven, but of what Riven might be forced to become. Is Dominic about to make the biggest mistake of his life? Or is Riven walking into a trap he can't fight his way out of? Tell us what you think happens next. The punch came from the left. Riven saw it half a second before impact. Enough time to shift his weight, not enough to avoid it completely. Knuckles grazed his cheekbone, the force spinning his head to the side as pain exploded across his face. He didn't fall. Dominic had cornered him in the parking garage 3 days after the lounge incident. No witnesses, no cameras in this section. Just concrete pillars and the echo of footsteps and the metallic taste of blood in Riven's mouth. You cost me respect, Dominic said, circling slowly. His lip had healed, but the humiliation hadn't. Made me look weak in front of people who matter. Riven backed up, hand instinctively moving to protect his stomach. I didn't do anything. You existed. Dominic moved closer, fists raised. That was enough. Another punch came, faster this time, aimed at Riven's ribs. Riven twisted, redirecting the blow past him, but Dominic was already adjusting, already compensating. This wasn't the clumsy aggression of someone who'd never fought. This was trained violence. Dominic had done this before. Cade thinks he can protect you, Dominic continued, breathing steady despite the exertion. But Cade's not here. No one's here. Just you and me and a conversation that's overdue. Riven's back hit a concrete pillar. Nowhere left to retreat. Dominic smiled. Finally, he swung again, harder, committed, the kind of strike meant to break bones. Riven could have moved, should have moved, but something in him snapped. Not anger, not fear, just exhaustion with running. His hand came up, not to block, but to intercept. Fingers closed around Dominic's wrist mid-swing, grip tight enough to stop momentum completely. Dominic's eyes went wide. Riven twisted, using Dominic's own force against him, redirecting the punch into the pillar. Knuckles connected with concrete instead of flesh. The sound echoed through the garage like a gunshot. Dominic screamed. Riven released him immediately, stepping back, breathing hard. Dominic cradled his hand against his chest, face twisted in pain and shock. "You! I didn't want this," Riven said quietly. "You broke my hand. You tried to break my ribs." Dominic straightened slowly, eyes burning with something beyond rage. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Riven said nothing, just stood there, one hand over his stomach, the other hanging loose at his side. "This isn't over," Dominic said, voice shaking. "This is just the beginning." He backed away, still cradling his injured hand, disappearing into the shadows between parked cars. Riven waited until the sound of footsteps faded completely before allowing himself to collapse against the pillar. His hands were shaking. His face throbbed where Dominic had landed that first punch. And the baby was moving. Frantic, agitated movement that felt like panic. "I'm sorry," Riven whispered, pressing both hands against the curve of his stomach. "I'm so sorry." But apologies didn't change what had just happened. Didn't change what Dominic would do next. Didn't change the fact that Riven had just revealed exactly what he'd spent 3 years hiding. His phone buzzed. A text from Cade. "Where are you?" Riven stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Leaving. Don't contact me again." He deleted Cade's number immediately after sending it. Then he walked to his car, drove home, and locked every door behind him. The baby continued moving, restless, uneasy. Riven sat on the couch in the dark, listening to the sounds of the city outside his window and wondering how long he had before everything fell apart completely. His phone buzzed again. A known number. He almost didn't open it, but curiosity or maybe just resignation made him look. "I know what you did. Dominic's hand is broken in 3 places. He's talking. Others are listening. You need to leave. Tonight. K." Riven read the message twice. Then he stood, moving to the bedroom and pulling a duffel bag from the closet. He'd packed this bag 3 years ago, when he first arrived in Black Harbor. Emergency money, clean IDs, contacts in other cities, everything he needed to disappear. He'd hoped he'd never use it. His hands moved automatically, clothes, documents, the small box of photos he'd never shown anyone. The baby kicked hard as if protesting. "I know," Riven murmured. "I know you don't want to leave, but staying means..." He couldn't finish, because staying meant confrontation, meant violence, meant becoming the person he'd fought so hard to leave behind. His phone buzzed again. Dominic filed a report. "Internal security is coming for you. You have maybe an hour. Please, Riven, run." Riven zipped the bag closed, looked around the small apartment one last time. This had been home. Not perfect, not safe, but his. And now he was leaving it behind because he'd defended himself, because he'd refused to be a victim, because the system punished resistance more than it punished violence. He grabbed his keys, shouldered the bag, and opened the door. Cade stood in the hallway. Riven's breath caught. "You didn't run," Cade said quietly. "I was about to." "No, you weren't." Cade's expression was unreadable. "You were standing there deciding whether to fight or disappear, and I think you were choosing fight." Riven's grip tightened on the bag. "Get out of my way." "I can't." "Yes, you can. Just step aside and pretend you never saw me." Cade shook his head slowly. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" "Because," Cade said, voice low, "I made a mistake, and I'm trying to fix it before you pay for my arrogance." Riven studied him, really looked at him for the first time since this whole mess started. Cade looked exhausted, worried, almost desperate. "You can't fix this," Riven said. "Maybe not, but I can try." "How?" Cade stepped closer, keeping his hands visible, non-threatening. "By telling the truth about what happened, about why Dominic attacked you, about the fact that you defended yourself against someone twice your size while 7 months pregnant. They won't care. Some of them will." Cade's jaw tightened. "And the ones who don't will have to answer to Moretti directly." "Why would Moretti care?" "Because I'm going to make him care." Cade pulled out his phone, showing Riven a video file. "Security footage from the garage. I pulled it before anyone else could. It shows everything. Dominic attacking first. You defending. Him walking away with a broken hand while you..." He paused. "While you let him leave instead of finishing it." Riven's throat tightened. "That's restraint," Cade continued. "That's control. That's exactly what this organization claims to value. And if they punish you for it, they're hypocrites. They are hypocrites." "I know." Cade lowered his phone. "But I'm betting they're hypocrites who don't want their hypocrisy on record." For the first time in days, Riven felt something other than dread. Hope. Small. Fragile. Dangerous. But there. "Why are you doing this?" Riven asked quietly. Cade was quiet for a long moment. "Because you were right. In the lounge. I did want them to see me defend you. I wanted..." He cut himself off, struggling with something. "I wanted them to know you mattered." "Why?" "Because you do." The words hung between them. Simple. Heavy. Impossible to take back. Riven's hand pressed against his stomach, feeling the baby's movement slow, calm, as if sensing the shift in tension. "What happens now?" Riven asked. "Now," Cade said, "we go talk to Moretti, together, and we make sure the right story gets told. And if he doesn't listen?" Cade's expression hardened. "Then we make him listen." He extended his hand. "Not a command. Not a demand. An offer." Riven looked at it for a long moment. Then he took it, and together they walked back into the building where everything had started. Not running, not hiding, choosing. Will Moretti see the truth? Or is Riven walking into a trap with no way out? Let us know what you think. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it was. Riven stood beside Cade, watching the numbers climb, feeling the weight of every second. His hand hadn't left his stomach. The baby had gone still again. That deep, unsettling stillness that made him want to press harder, to confirm life was still there, still fighting. Cade stared straight ahead, jaw set, phone clutched in his hand like a weapon. Neither of them spoke. The elevator dinged. The doors opened onto a hallway Riven had never seen before. Plush carpet, wood paneling, artwork that probably cost more than his entire year's salary. This was where power lived. Where decisions got made that changed lives without ever consulting the people those lives belonged to. A secretary sat at a desk near the end of the hall, older, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who'd seen everything and forgot nothing. "He's expecting you," she said without looking up from her computer. Cade nodded, moving past her toward the double doors beyond. Riven followed. The office inside was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A desk that could have doubled as a dining table, leather chairs, a bar, bookshelves lined with titles Riven recognized from college, philosophy, strategy, texts about power and its maintenance. And behind the desk sat Moretti. He was older than Riven expected. Maybe 60, maybe older. Gray hair cut short, suit perfectly tailored. Eyes that tracked every movement with the precision of someone who'd built an empire by noticing what others missed. "Cade," Moretti said, voice surprisingly warm. "And this must be Riven." Riven tensed. "Sit." Moretti gestured to the chairs facing his desk. "Both of you." They sat. Moretti leaned back, fingers steepled, studying them both with an expression that gave nothing away. "I've heard several versions of recent events," he said finally. "Dominic's version involves assault, unprovoked violence, a threat to organizational safety. He paused. What's your version, Cade? Dominic's lying, Cade said bluntly. And I have proof. He held up his phone. Moretti raised an eyebrow. Show me. Cade stood, moving around the desk to angle the phone toward Moretti. The video played, grainy security footage showing Dominic approaching Riven, throwing the first punch, continuing to attack while Riven defended, showing Riven's restraint, showing Dominic walking away intact. Moretti watched without expression. When the video ended, he was quiet for a long moment. Interesting, he said finally. And where did you get this footage? Security archive. Before anyone could delete it. I see. Moretti's gaze shifted to Riven. And what do you have to say about this? Riven met his eyes. I defended myself. That's all. That's all, Moretti repeated. Most people in your position would have done more, would have retaliated, escalated. I'm pregnant. Escalation wasn't an option. And yet you stopped him, broke his hand, made him retreat. Moretti leaned forward slightly. That takes skill, training, the kind of background one doesn't usually list on a catering application. Riven said nothing. Moretti smiled small, knowing. I did some research after Cade mentioned you. Made a few calls. Nevada has a very active underground circuit. And apparently, a few years ago, there was an Omega boxer who walked away from it all despite being undefeated. He paused. Would you happen to know anything about that? Riven's pulse quickened. I left that life behind, he said quietly. Clearly not entirely, given recent events. I left the violence. I left the fighting. I left the person who thought that was the only way to survive. And yet, Moretti said, when push came to shove, quite literally, you remembered how. Muscle memory isn't the same as choice, isn't it? Moretti stood, moving to the window overlooking the city. I've built this organization on a simple principle. Power respects power. Dominic attacked you because he thought you were weak. Thought pregnancy made you vulnerable. Thought Omega meant victim. He turned back. And you proved him catastrophically wrong. Riven's hands tightened over his stomach. Now I have a problem, Moretti continued. Dominic is demanding consequences. His allies are pressuring me. But the evidence shows he was the aggressor. That you defended yourself within reasonable limits. That you, in fact, showed remarkable restraint given your capabilities. He moved back to his desk, sitting down slowly. So here's what's going to happen, Moretti said. Dominic will be reassigned, somewhere far from here. His complaints will be filed as groundless. And you, he looked at Riven, will continue working. No restrictions, no consequences. Riven exhaled slowly. However, Moretti added, there is one condition. The air changed. What condition? Cade asked, tension returning to his voice. Riven's background is now known. By me, by several others. That makes him valuable. Moretti's eyes locked onto Riven's. And I don't waste valuable assets on kitchen work. Riven's stomach dropped. I'm not an asset. Everyone's an asset. The question is how they're utilized. Moretti pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. Security consulting. Training our people in defensive techniques. Occasional personal protection when needed. Nothing that puts you or your child at risk, but something that makes use of what you can do. Riven stared at the folder without touching it. And if I refuse? Then you leave, Moretti said simply, with a generous severance package. Enough to start over somewhere else. No strings, no threats, just goodbye. The choice was clear. Stay and be useful, or leave and be forgotten. Cade shifted beside him. This wasn't the deal. I'm offering better than a deal, Moretti said. I'm offering legitimacy, a way forward that doesn't require hiding or pretending or living in fear of being discovered. He looked at Riven. You walked away from violence once. I'm giving you a way to control it instead. Control is just another word for participation, Riven said quietly. Perhaps. But participation with agency is better than survival through silence. Moretti leaned back. Think about it. You have until tomorrow to decide. He turned his attention to his computer, the dismissal clear. Cade stood. Come on. Riven followed him out, legs unsteady, mind racing. They didn't speak until they were back in the elevator. I'm sorry, Cade said as the doors closed. I thought I was helping. You were. But now you're trapped anyway. Riven shook his head. I'm not trapped. I'm being given a choice. That's more than I had this morning. The elevator descended in silence. When the doors opened, Cade turned to Riven. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Why? Because... Cade stopped, struggling again with words that wouldn't come easily. Because you deserve better than this. Better than all of this. And if I can't give you that, at least I can give you options. Riven studied him for a long moment, then did something he hadn't planned. He reached out, placing his hand briefly on Cade's arm. Thank you, Riven said quietly. Cade's expression shifted. Surprise, then something softer, almost vulnerable. Don't thank me yet, he said. This isn't over. I know. They separated in the lobby, Cade returning to whatever responsibilities waited, Riven heading toward the exit. But before Riven reached the door, he stopped, turned back, made a decision. He pulled out his phone, typing a message to the number Moretti had included in the folder. I accept, but on my terms. We talk tomorrow about what those terms are. The response came almost immediately. I expected nothing less. 10 a.m. My office. M. Riven pocketed his phone, pushed through the exit doors, and stepped into the cool night air. The baby kicked, strong, insistent, alive. And for the first time in weeks, Riven smiled. Not because he'd won, but because he'd stopped running. And sometimes that was victory enough. Has Riven just made the best decision of his life? Or the biggest mistake? Drop your thoughts below. 3 weeks passed before anything changed. Riven met with Moretti as promised. Outlined his terms. No field work during pregnancy, no involvement in anything that could be considered criminal, full autonomy over his schedule. Moretti agreed to everything without hesitation, which made Riven more suspicious than if he'd argued. But the work itself turned out to be exactly what Moretti had described. Defense training for new recruits, technique review for experienced security, consultation on protective protocols. Nothing violent, nothing that compromised his principles. Nothing that felt like the person he used to be. The pay increased substantially. The respect, reluctant, grudging but real, followed. And Dominic disappeared from Black Harbor entirely, reassigned to some distant territory where his humiliation wouldn't follow him. Riven should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt watched. Not by Moretti, not by Cade, by something else, something waiting. He was in the training facility when he finally understood what. The space was converted from an old warehouse. High ceilings, concrete floors, equipment ranging from basic weights to sophisticated defensive simulators. Riven had been demonstrating redirect techniques to a group of 5 recruits when he felt it. That shift in air pressure that meant someone dangerous had entered the room. He turned slowly. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, elegant, dressed in a way that made everyone else look underdressed by comparison. She was maybe 50, maybe ageless, and when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. Riven Hale, she said, voice smooth as silk and twice as expensive. I've heard so much about you. The recruits had gone silent. Riven straightened, one hand moving instinctively to his stomach. 8 months now, the baby constantly active. Can I help you? That depends. She moved into the room with the kind of confidence that came from owning everything she looked at. I'm Elise Thorne. Perhaps Moretti mentioned me? He hadn't, which meant this wasn't official. I don't believe he did, Riven said carefully. How unfortunate. Elise stopped a few feet away, studying him with an intensity that felt invasive. I handle, let's call them delicate situations, problems that require finesse rather than force. I'm not interested in problems. No one ever is. But they find us anyway. Her gaze dropped briefly to his stomach. You're due soon. 6 weeks. And then what? Maternity leave? Sleepless nights? The slow realization that this life, she gestured around the facility, doesn't accommodate new parents? Riven's jaw tightened. Is there a point to this conversation? The point, Elise said, is that you're an asset with an expiration date, and I'm here to offer an alternative. I'm not for sale. Everyone's for sale. The question is price. She pulled a card from her jacket, holding it out. When you realize that training recruits isn't enough to support a child in this city, call me. I pay better than Moretti, and I don't pretend to care about your principles. Riven didn't take the card. Elise smiled, setting it on a nearby bench. Keep it anyway. You'll need it. Then she was gone, disappearing as smoothly as she'd arrived. The recruits remained silent. Riven picked up the card, reading the embossed text. Elise Thorne, private security, discretion guaranteed. No phone number, no address, just a name and a promise. He should have thrown it away. Instead, he pocketed it. That night, he sat in his apartment, larger now, safer, paid for by his new salary, and stared at the card. The baby kicked. I know, Riven murmured. I know what you're thinking, that I'm considering something I shouldn't. Another kick. But what if she's right? What if this doesn't last? What if Moretti decides I'm not useful anymore? His phone buzzed. Cade's number. Heard Elise paid you a visit. Don't trust her. Please. Riven stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response. What do you know about her? The reply came immediately. Everything. Can I come over? We need to talk. Riven hesitated, then sent his address. 20 minutes later, Cade stood in his doorway, looking more worried than Riven had ever seen him. She's dangerous, Cade said without preamble. Not in the obvious way, in the way that destroys you slowly. Explain. Cade moved into the apartment, pacing. Elise Thorne builds networks, collects people with specific skills, uses them for jobs that don't officially exist. And when those jobs go wrong, which they always do eventually, she disappears. Leaves her assets to handle the consequences. You sound like you're speaking from experience. I am. Cade stopped pacing, meeting Riven's eyes. She recruited me 5 years ago. Promised autonomy, good pay, interesting work. And for a while, it was exactly that. Until it wasn't. What changed? I realized the work wasn't interesting. It was illegal. And the autonomy was an illusion. She controlled everything. And when I tried to leave, he pulled up his shirt, revealing a scar across his ribs. She made sure I understood that leaving wasn't an option. Riven's breath caught. I only got out because Moretti intervened, Cade continued. Bought my contract. Made it clear that touching me again would start a war Elise couldn't win. He lowered his shirt. But most people don't have someone like Moretti protecting them. I'm not planning to work for her. Good, because she doesn't take rejection well. And now that she knows about you, about what you can do, she's going to keep pushing until you either accept or become a problem she needs to eliminate. Riven sat down slowly, the weight of the situation settling over him. So what do I do? You stay close to people who won't sell you out. You keep your head down. And you trust that Moretti's protection extends far enough to keep her away. And if it doesn't? Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down beside Riven. Then we figure it out. Together. The word together hung in the air. Riven looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't expected. Not attraction. Not romance. Just solidarity. The recognition that sometimes survival meant alliance. Okay, Riven said quietly. Together. Cade nodded, relief visible in his expression. They sat in silence for a while, just breathing, just existing in the same space without demands or expectations. Then the baby kicked hard enough that Riven winced. Cade's eyes widened. Are you? I'm fine. The baby's just active. Can I? Cade cut himself off, suddenly uncertain. Never mind. That's invasive. You want to feel? Cade looked surprised. Would that be okay? Riven nodded, guiding Cade's hand to where the baby was kicking. Cade's expression transformed, awe replacing worry, wonder replacing fear. That's incredible, he whispered. That's exhausting, Riven corrected, but he was smiling. They stayed like that for a moment, connected by circumstance, by choice, by the strange friendship forming between two people who should have been enemies. Then Cade's phone buzzed. He checked it, expression darkening. What? Riven asked. Elise just filed a formal inquiry about you with Moretti. She's claiming you're a flight risk, that your pregnancy makes you unstable, that you need observation. Riven's blood ran cold. Can she do that? She can try, but Moretti won't. His phone buzzed again. Cade read the message, face going pale. What? Riven repeated. Moretti's calling an evaluation hearing. Tomorrow. He has to, given Elise's position in the organization. Cade looked up. You're going to have to defend yourself. Again. Riven closed his eyes, exhaustion washing over him. I'm so tired of defending myself, he said quietly. I know. When does it end? Cade's hand was still resting where the baby had kicked. When you stop being interesting to people who see you as a resource instead of a person. So never. Maybe. Cade squeezed gently, not romantic, just supportive. But you're not doing this alone. Not anymore. Riven opened his eyes, meeting Cade's gaze. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, he believed him. Is the evaluation hearing Riven's chance to finally end this? Or is Elise setting a trap he can't escape? Tell us what you think happens next. The hearing room was smaller than Riven expected. No grand tribunal. No audience. Just a conference table, 6 chairs, and the 3 people who would decide whether he kept his autonomy or lost everything he'd built. Moretti sat at the head of the table. Elise to his right, perfectly composed. And to his left, unexpectedly, Cade. There as a witness, apparently, though Riven suspected he'd fought for that position. Riven sat across from them, 8 months pregnant and exhausted. The baby hadn't let him sleep. Kept kicking all night as if sensing the danger morning would bring. Let's begin, Moretti said, voice neutral. Elise has raised concerns about Riven's stability and reliability given his current condition. Riven, you have the opportunity to address those concerns. What concerns? Riven asked, keeping his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his throat. I've fulfilled every obligation, exceeded expectations in every training session, maintained perfect attendance despite. He gestured to his stomach. Obvious challenges. The concern, Elise said smoothly, isn't your current performance. It's your future reliability. Pregnancy affects judgment. Hormones, stress, the protective instincts that override rational decision-making. We've seen it before. Assets who become liabilities the moment they become parents. I'm not an asset. I'm an employee. Semantics. Elise smiled. The point remains. Can you guarantee that when your child is born, you'll remain committed to this organization? That you won't prioritize personal safety over professional obligation? I've never not prioritized professional obligation. Because you haven't had a child yet. The accusation hung in the air. Riven's hands tightened over his stomach. You're asking me to choose between being a parent and being useful. That's not evaluation. That's coercion. It's reality, Elise countered. This organization requires commitment. Absolute, unwavering commitment. And children undermine that. Then fire every parent in this building, Riven said, voice sharp. See how well the organization functions. Moretti raised a hand. Let's stay focused. Elise, what specifically are you proposing? Extended observation, post-birth evaluation, a probationary period where Riven's decisions are reviewed by a supervisor before implementation. Elise's gaze locked onto Riven. To ensure no conflicts of interest emerge. That's not observation, Cade said suddenly. That's imprisonment. It's protection, Elise corrected, for everyone involved. It's control, Riven said quietly. You want to own me. That's what this is really about. Elise's expression didn't change. I want to ensure organizational security. If that requires oversight, so be it. Moretti leaned back, studying both of them. Cade, you've worked with Riven. What's your assessment? He's the most competent trainer we have, Cade said immediately. Disciplined, skilled, and most importantly, restraint-oriented. He de-escalates situations others would escalate. He teaches control instead of aggression. That's exactly what this organization needs. And his pregnancy has never interfered with his work. If anything, it's made him more careful, more precise. Cade's jaw tightened. Elise's concerns aren't about performance. They're about acquisition. Elise's eyes narrowed. Excuse me, you want him working for you? Cade said bluntly. And when he refused, you decided to make him unemployable here so he'd have no choice. That's quite an accusation. It's true. Moretti held up a hand. Enough. He turned to Riven. What do you want? The question caught Riven off guard. I want to work, he said quietly. I want to support my child. I want to do my job without being treated like a threat just because I exist. And after the birth? I'll take the leave I'm entitled to. Then I'll return. Same commitment. Same standards. Can you guarantee that? Riven met his eyes. Can anyone guarantee anything? Life changes. People adapt. But refusing to hire or retain someone because they might have priorities beyond work is discrimination. And last I checked, this organization claims to be above that. Silence filled the room. Then Moretti nodded slowly. You're right. Elise's composure cracked slightly. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious. Moretti stood. Riven stays. No oversight. No probation. He'll take standard parental leave when the time comes, then return to his position. And if his performance ever actually declines, which I doubt, we'll address it then. This is a mistake, Elise said, voice tight. Perhaps, but it's my mistake to make. Moretti looked at her steadily. And Elise, stop trying to recruit my employees. If I find out you've contacted Riven again outside official channels, we'll have a very different conversation. Elise's expression went cold, but she nodded once, then stood and left without another word. Moretti turned to Riven. You're dismissed. Take the rest of the day. Riven stood slowly, legs unsteady with relief. Cade walked him out. They didn't speak until they were in the elevator. Thank you, Riven said quietly. I didn't do anything. You stood up for me when you didn't have to. Cade shrugged. Seemed like the right thing to do. The elevator doors opened. They stepped into the lobby, the noise and bustle of the building surrounding them. Riven stopped at the exit, turning to face Cade. Why? Why what? Why help me? What do you get out of this? Cade was quiet for a moment, considering. Maybe nothing, he said finally. Or maybe the satisfaction of knowing I didn't let someone decent get destroyed by people who mistake cruelty for strength. He smiled small, genuine. Take care of yourself, Riven. And that kid. Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Riven stood alone for a moment, then pushed through the exit doors into sunlight. The baby kicked, strong, insistent, alive. And Riven realized something fundamental had shifted. Not in the world around him, but in how he moved through it. He wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding, wasn't waiting for permission to exist. He was just living. Complicated, messy, imperfect living. But did Riven just win his freedom? Or is Elise planning something worse? Let us know your thoughts. The call came at 2 a.m., 6 weeks later. Riven woke to his phone vibrating against the nightstand, the screen casting pale light across the dark room. He answered without checking the number, still half asleep, mind foggy. Hello, it's done. Moretti's voice was calm, businesslike. Elise Thorne is no longer a concern. Riven sat up slowly, confusion clearing into alertness. What do you mean? She attempted to recruit 3 more of my employees after our conversation. Made threats when they refused. So I removed her from the organization entirely. A pause. Permanently. Riven's blood ran cold. You mean? I mean she no longer works here. What happened after that is her business. The distinction was clear. Plausible deniability. I'm calling to let you know you're safe. Truly safe. No more looking over your shoulder. I don't know what to say. Say you'll continue doing good work. That's all I ask. Moretti's tone softened slightly. How are you feeling? Riven looked down at his stomach. 9 months now, the baby overdue by 3 days. Tired. Ready. I imagine so. Take all the time you need when the moment comes. We'll manage. Thank you. No need. You've earned it. A brief pause. Good luck, Riven. The line went dead. Riven set the phone down, processing what he'd just heard. Elise was gone. Removed. The threat eliminated. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt the weight of what removal meant in an organization like this. The baby kicked hard enough to make him wince. I know, Riven murmured, hand pressing against the movement. I know you don't like this world. Neither do I. But it's the one we have. Another kick. Riven stood slowly, moving to the window. The city stretched out below him, lights glittering against darkness, life continuing its endless motion. He'd built something here, not perfect, not pure, but real. A job that utilized his skills without demanding his soul. Allies who defended him when it mattered. Safety, fragile, complicated, but genuine. And soon, very soon, a child who would never know the life Riven had left behind. The baby kicked again, more insistent. Then Riven felt it. The unmistakable sensation of something shifting, changing, beginning. He grabbed his phone, calling the one person he trusted most. Cade answered on the second ring. Riven? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Riven said, breathing through the tightening sensation across his abdomen. But I think it's time. Time for... Cade's voice shifted from sleepy to alert in an instant. The baby? Yeah. Okay. I'm on my way. Have you called the hospital? Not yet. Do that now. I'll meet you there. Cade, you don't have to. I'm already getting dressed. Just get to the hospital. I'll be right behind you. The line went dead. Riven stood there for a moment, phone in hand, feeling another contraction build. Then he moved into motion, grabbing the hospital bag he'd packed weeks ago, calling for a car, making his way downstairs. The ride to the hospital was a blur of streetlights and contractions, and the strange calm that comes when there's nothing left to do but surrender to what's coming. Cade was waiting when Riven arrived. You beat me here, Riven said, surprised. I may have broken a few traffic laws. Cade took Riven's bag, supporting him with his other arm. Come on, let's get you inside. The next hours passed in fragments. Pain, breathing, nurses with calm voices and competent hands. Cade staying nearby, offering water, counting through contractions, never once suggesting he shouldn't be there. And then, finally, in the gray light just before dawn, a cry. Sharp, indignant, absolutely alive. It's a girl, the nurse said, placing the tiny, squirming body against Riven's chest. Riven looked down at his daughter, red-faced, furious at being born, perfect in every impossible way. Hi, he whispered, voice breaking. I'm your dad. And I'm so sorry about the world you just entered. But I promise. He pressed his lips to her forehead. I promise I'll do everything I can to make it better for you. The baby's crying softened, tiny hands curling against his skin. Cade stood a few feet away, eyes bright with something that might have been tears. She's beautiful, he said quietly. She's terrifying, Riven corrected. But yeah, beautiful. What are you going to name her? Riven looked down at his daughter, thinking about strength and survival and the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Maya, he said. It means illusion, magic, the force that shapes reality. That's perfect. The nurse took Maya for her first checkup, leaving Riven and Kate alone in the quiet room. "Thank you," Riven said, "for being here. Where else would I be? I don't know. Somewhere that doesn't involve witnessing someone else's life change completely." Kate smiled. "Maybe I needed to see it. Needed the reminder that not everything in this world is about power and control and dominance." He moved closer, sitting in the chair beside Riven's bed. "Sometimes it's just this. Life continuing. People choosing to be kind. You say that like you're surprised. I am. Constantly." They sat in comfortable silence until the nurse returned with Maya, now cleaned and swaddled and somehow even smaller than before. Riven took his daughter, marveling at how something so tiny could feel so impossibly heavy with meaning. "What happens now?" Kate asked. "Now," Riven said, "I take leave, spend time with her, figure out what being a parent actually means." He looked up. "And then, when I'm ready, I come back, resume the work, try to make sure the next generation doesn't have to fight as hard as we did." "That's a good plan. It's the only plan I have." Kate stood, moving toward the door. "I should let you rest." "Kate." He turned back. "Thank you," Riven said again. "Not just for tonight, for everything. For seeing me as a person instead of a problem." Cade's expression softened. "That's just basic decency. In places like ours, that's revolutionary." Cade nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." He left quietly, door closing behind him. Riven sat alone with his daughter, watching the sun rise through the hospital window. Maya slept peacefully, unaware of the complicated world she'd been born into, unaware of the battles her father had fought to give her even this much safety. And Riven thought about the journey that had brought him here. From underground circuits where violence was currency, to a city where silence became survival, to a moment where defending himself had nearly cost everything, to this, a tiny hand wrapped around his finger, a heartbeat synchronizing with his own. He thought about Cade's question in that office so many weeks ago. When does it end? And he realized the answer. It didn't end. The fight for dignity, for safety, for the right to exist without constantly justifying that existence. That fight never ended, but it changed, evolved, became less about personal survival and more about building something better for those who came after. Maya stirred, making small sounds that would probably become cries soon. "I know," Riven murmured. "You're hungry, you're confused, you're wondering why you're not floating in warm darkness anymore." He adjusted her carefully, preparing to feed her. "But I promise you, kiddo, this world, complicated and messy as it is, it's worth figuring out." Maya's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but searching, and Riven smiled, because real strength wasn't winning every fight. It was knowing when to stop fighting and start building. It was choosing restraint over retaliation. It was surviving with integrity intact. It was this moment, right here, holding new life and promising to protect it. Not through violence, but through presence. Through showing up. Through refusing to let fear dictate choices. Through being exactly who you were, unapologetically, even when the world demanded you be smaller. The sun climbed higher. The city woke. And Riven Hale, former fighter, current father, forever survivor, began the next chapter of his life with the quiet certainty that he'd finally found something worth protecting that didn't require him to destroy himself in the process. His daughter, his integrity, his peace. And maybe, just maybe, a future where neither of them had to fight quite so hard just to exist. Riven's journey proves that real power isn't about dominance. It's about choosing dignity over defeat, even when the world demands you break. If the story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about strength and survival, we want to hear from you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us what it means to be human. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Because stories like this don't just entertain, they transform. And transformation happens when we share, discuss, and support each other. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of a community that believes everyone deserves to be seen, heard, and valued. See you in the next story.